All right. Thank you for watching another episode of the Scott Report. Tonight, we're going to be discussing a topic that is in the news, and a lot of people are, in the various newscasts discussing what's going to happen with Russia, Ukraine. Tonight, I just want to talk to you. Just want to talk to you about my thoughts and, more importantly, my opinion of the situation. There's a lot of fear mongering going on. That's clear. There are people right now thinking that we about to go into a nuclear war. And seriously posturing. And this is not the first time that this has happened. So I'm going to share with you a few clips tonight. And, for some, it's going to be new information. And for others, it's going to be information that you've heard before, but you may not have connected the dots. So tonight I'm going to connect some dots as it relates to international politics and what's happening. So with that said, I want to, again, thank you for watching. And more importantly, I want to ask you to, to vibe with me, to put your thinking cap on, to really see what's going down. So let's start off first with war and how war is conducted, in this country, and how people conduct themselves who are in positions of power, because it's chess. And there's some chess moves that are happening right now as it relates to this whole situation with Russia, Ukraine, Crimea. And like I said in the beginning, it's got a lot of people afraid. But when you got information, fear is I won't say it's eliminated, but you have some perspective on the situation. So, like I said, let's start off with a quick video. This is going to be to worry about. Let me cue this up here. This video is of former General Wesley Clark. He also ran for president. But in this brief video, which is a good cue up to what we're going to be discussing tonight, is an example of war and how it's conducted in the United States. And he breaks it down real clear. So let me share my screen, do a few things here. I'm gonna optimize this clip, share the sound, and let's get into it. Wesley Clark.
Iraq, not Iran. I knew why, because I'd been through the Pentagon right after 9/11. About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you gotta come in. You gotta come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs from the Secretary of Defense office today. And he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
All right, so you can see clearly there that there was already a plan in place for the United States to go to war with a lot of the countries that we have gone to war with already. He mentioned Iraq, he mentioned Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, etc. And all of these countries were on the list, labeled as terrorists, and on the list for the United States to go to war with. Again, this plan was already set in place after 9/11. So what does that tell you? That tells you that even before the attack, even before the propaganda, there was a decision at the highest levels of government to attack these countries, not in a defensive posture, but in a posture of aggression. So, again, we're going to talk about this tonight. I want to grab a book real quick. Hold on, please. I'm going to share my screen here to show you exactly the book I'm referring to. Let's see here, share, advance. All right. So this is the book. It's Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, and it's called The Grand Chessboard. In this book, he talks about a whole lot of things, but mainly the main theme of the book is related to the fact that the world is seen as a chessboard to the people at the highest levels of government, in our government and around the world. In particular, though, and this is in the conclusion section, he brings up an important point, which I think is extremely pertinent, relevant to what's happening right now. What's happening now in the United States is that people have really gotten fatigued with everything with this pandemic. As a result of that, you got people basically turning on the people they trusted in government, people that were in favor of everything that was coming on the world news, right? People that were in favor of taking experimental medical procedures and all that. I'm not going to get into that, but here's the point. In this book, page 221, the conclusion section, he says, moreover, as America becomes an increasingly multicultural society, it may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues, except in the circumstance of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. So in this book, written by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was National Security Advisor for like 5 presidents, he clearly says that when, in a society that's multicultural, that is really getting disillusioned, the best way to bring them together is to create, in this case, based on the subject matter we're talking about tonight with Russia and Ukraine, to create an external threat, a direct, perceived external threat. Russia has been the boogeyman since the Trump era and even before then. And it's a good tool that the elites use in order to get the population galvanized and unified around the country, around the flag. Zbigniew Brzezinski is not well known in pop culture, but in people who understand international politics, people that study it, people that are, involved in the circles, they know who Zbigniew is. But let me give you another example, another brief video of Zbigniew Brzezinski. And in this video, this has to do with the Afghan war, not the Afghan war that we just got out of, but the Afghan war with the Soviet Union back in the the late 70s going into the early 80s. And, as you know, in 1989, the former Soviet Union fell. And this failure or this collapse of the country is attributed to the Afghan war and the idea that this conflict is what destroyed their country. So here, let me let you see the background and the setup so that you can get a firsthand look at Zbigniew Brzezinski and what they were about, what he was about.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
So he flew halfway around the world to rally some troops that would be later identified by the US public and by the world for that matter as terrorists. They were terrorists when they were fighting us. But the Mujahideen, the Afghans, the whole group, the Taliban, believe it or not, they were once allied with the United States as long as their fight was with the Soviet Union, was with Russia. So that's a classic example of the grand chessboard. That's a classic example of this book that I just showed you. This is a game. Let me show it to you one more time. This game is an international game that they are playing, and they move pieces on the board. And sometimes the pieces are with you, and sometimes they're not. So if you haven't picked up this book, it's a great book. It can give you kind of like a crash course, so to speak, and what's really happening in terms of international politics and policy. There's also another video I want to show you regarding false flags. Now, what's very, to me, what's very interesting about this term false flags, at one time that term was considered conspiracy theory, right? Countries like the United States would deny the idea that governments use false flags in order to stage war, in order to, offensively go after somebody strategically in the name of defense. In fact, another thing I want to mention is that, the Pentagon or the Defense Department was once known as the Department of War, but that was too aggressive. So the public policy makers and the people that create image, so to speak, for the government to make them look good, the policy makers, if you will, that want to put the right face on it, public relations, they decided, a better name, a more accurate name to describe what we're doing is the Defense Department. And that's what they called it. So that's what most people know it is, or know it as, rather, referred to. But it was not always called the Defense Department. It was once called the Department of War. In this next video I want to show you, this deals with how false flags are conducted. So I'm going to pull this up, share my screen, and let you hear from this policymaker regarding false flags. Here we go.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interest. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall they had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing, which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if in fact the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. But I would just like to suggest that one can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either or proposition. It's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
They could get nasty. So that guy, policymaker, just broke down false flags and how they work. He mentioned the USS Maine, which was what created or what started the Spanish-American War, which led to the United States ultimately capturing a lot of the Caribbean, mainly, Mexico, areas like Cuba, the Virgin Islands. All of this was once controlled, and the Philippines. All this was once controlled by the Spanish. But the Spanish-American War put that in the hands of the United States government. But before the United States could declare war on Spain, there was an attack, sinking of a ship called the USS Maine. Now, many historians have said that that bombing or that sinking of that ship was actually something that was done covertly by the government. We know that McNamara, who was the advisor under John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, said basically on his deathbed, but once he became an old man, that the whole Tonkin Gulf incident that started the Vietnam War was fake, was false. Over and over and over again, you see incidents like this. 9/11 was an attack supposedly by terrorists from the Middle East that led us to go to war with Afghanistan and Iraq. Now ask yourself this question. 19 terrorists, 17 of which were from Saudi Arabia, but you're going to war with Iraq and Afghanistan. That don't make sense. The strategic idea or the plan from the get up, from the beginning, was to do exactly what Wesley Clark said in that earlier video, was to go after these 7 countries, but they needed a reason to do it. Now I'm giving you a lot of context here. I'm giving you history, right? I'm giving you this history because remember, the whole purpose of this conversation tonight is to bring it up to date regarding this situation right here. The situation that's happening with Russia and Ukraine, this whole area in Europe, Eastern Europe. And a lot of people don't understand that basically after the Soviet Union fell in 1989, you had a situation where the United States under President Reagan and Vice President Bush basically cut a deal with the Soviet Union that eventually became Russia in terms of name, but it's the same country, same body of politics, that they would not continue to move eastward into Russian territory. They did just the opposite. And you can see from this graph and this map, basically after World War II, 1949, 1952, 1955, you get around to the era of the Bush-Reagan era, And slowly you see the United States using NATO, right? Using NATO, the North American Treaty, I forget what the O stands for, but this is basically a organization of Western countries, European countries, the United States, et cetera. And their objective is to expand NATO or the European powers with the United States into Russian territory. You ask yourself, why are the Russians on the border with Ukraine? Why are they about to attack this country? This has nothing to do with that. What they're not telling you in history is that there was a deal cut that they would not put troops or expand NATO into an area that borders Russia. And right now that has totally been reneged on, that whole deal. Because since the 90s, you see here in 2004, your countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, obviously Poland, Romania, the Czech Republic, Germany, Italy, Bulgaria, all these areas have had troop buildups with the United States, because if you understand what NATO is, you understand that a lot of these troops in NATO are American troops stationed in Europe, and they're on the border of Russia, about to start a war, not the opposite. It's not the other way around, which you've been led to believe. It's actually the United States being the aggressor, but like I said earlier, pretending to be in a defensive posture. And let me show you another video. This video is of the president of Russia, the current president, Putin. And he gives a little brief history to what I'm exactly explaining to you. All right, let me pull this up. I'm gonna cue it up. But this is a press conference that he gave, and exactly what I said regarding, the deal and then how the deal was reneged on. He breaks it down. It's a short clip. Have some patience with it. It's about 2 minutes. And this is what's not being shown in our media. We don't get to see this kind of stuff, these kind of press conferences. We only see our president and our public officials. Because again, this is propaganda, right? Here we go.
That the further expansion eastwards is unacceptable. Is this not clear? It's not us who are deploying different missiles on the border of the United States. No. It's the United States are deploying their missiles right on our frontier, right in our backyard. Are we being excessive in our demands? We don't want any more missiles. We don't want missile systems or new weaponry right in our backyard. What would their reaction be if we were to come and on the border between the United States and Canada, or their border with Mexico, deployed a range of our own missiles? Have they never had territorial issues? What about California? What about Texas? Have they forgotten their own history? Okay, fine. Hush, hush. They're not remembering that. But now they're talking about Crimea all the time, left, right, and center. We're trying not to remind them what was happening before. So who has created Lenin? One created the Soviet Union, the Union Agreement of 2021 and 24, of course, followed his principles laid down by Lenin. So the security guarantees, let's put history aside. Let's talk about security guarantees or ensuring guarantees. It's not the talks themselves, but the results which matter. And I've reiterated many times, and you're well aware, not an inch eastwards. This is what we were promised. Not an inch eastwards. In the 1990s, we were told, well, basically they swindled us. They lied to us. 5 waves of further expansion to the east. This is what NATO engaged in. Now they have Poland, where they're installing their air weapon systems and shields. It's not us threatening them. We didn't come to the border of the United States or the United Kingdom. No, they came to our house, to our border. And now they're saying, oh, now we want Ukraine to be part of us as well. And then they're going to deploy their systems there in Ukraine and their military bases. This is what we're talking about. We don't want those. And you want some guarantees from us. No, you are owing us guarantees now, without any delay, not in decades to come. This is all soft speech about the need of guarantees for all. You should do what you say, what we planned. Are we threatening anyone? No, well, we have made it clear that
All right.
further extension.
So I'm going to stop this video, but he said exactly what I said a moment ago. There was a deal cut in the 1990s that the United States would not expand eastward, that they would stay out of the area known as Eastern Europe, that this would be like a neutral area. But instead, what has happened is that there's been an extension by the United States military and the militaries of NATO to go in more to Russia. And he made a great point. He said, look, if we were setting up bases and military, outlays and military operations outside of Canada or Mexico, this would be an outrage. Well, they're doing the exact same thing to the Russians. And, it's always important to point this out. People have heard the term the industrial military complex, but I'm going to try to explain it in the most basic way. Countries no longer, kick down the door of another nation and just take their natural resources and in the name of that flag of that country. It's a little more sophisticated when it comes to the industrial military complex in the United States. That's why I got this graphic up here. You see a soldier with a McDonald's hat, Coca-Cola bulletproof vest, Burger King on his sleeve, Starbucks on his leg, et cetera, Marlboro. Because basically what happens is that when a country is invaded, let's take Iraq, for example, it's not the United States that would just, boldly take their natural resources. No, they send in corporations to extract the resources from the country. And they did this time and time again throughout history. They did it in Iran with BP oil, British Petroleum, and they obviously did it with Iraq. But they didn't just take the oil out on, on American vehicles. No, they sent Shell Oil to go in and get it. They got American-based companies, contractors go in there and take the resources from the people and from the country. So this is a game. This is a giant gangster operation. And what I'm trying to point out is that this thing is a lot deeper. And before we send our children overseas to fight in a war, like many other wars, for big business, we need to really understand what's happening and not just go off what's happening in the corporate media, the nightly news, or what you might be reading, some headline from CNN, Bloomberg, Fox, whatever. They're all pumping out the propaganda machine. And on that note, I want to show you another book I have. This book, share the screen, is written by a guy by the name of Edward Bernays. And the title of this book is Propaganda. And this book came out in the 20s. In this book, he breaks down propaganda and how it is used, particularly in the United States. Because we think that it doesn't happen to us. We think that when we get the news from our media, that it is the truth, that it is uncorruptible, that somehow, everybody else is subject to lies, but we're not. No, this is a game. I'm going to read to you in a section. Now, this is in chapter 1. I really suggest that you go out and get this book. But I think, and I'm not going to read a lot from here, but I'm going to read just enough to kind of give you the overall theme of what he's talking about. Organizing chaos. Remember that term because we're going to deal with that too. The idea of a chaotic situation is really been throughout history it's called the Hegelian dialectic. And basically what it means is problem, create the reaction, and then come in with the solution. So this chaos, he goes in more detail later, but as he starts off this chapter, listen to this. The consensus and intelligent manipulation let me start all over. The consensus and intelligent manipulation of organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, our ideas are suggested largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. Then he goes on to talk about our invisible governors, et cetera, et cetera. But basically what he's talking about is the silent, quiet, subtle manipulation that people are given on a regular basis, but they think somehow if you watch the 6:30 news, world news every single day, and you're being fed information that Russia is aggressing against the United States and Europe, and they tell you that every single day, day after day, week after week, and then all of a sudden you're having a conversation about it, and before you know it, you have been manipulated, maybe unknowingly, to believe in exactly what you've been fed over a course of weeks regarding this particular issue. This has been done time again, and it continues to be done. So again, that's why we're talking tonight, because I don't want you to be manipulated. I want to kind of point out some things that are obvious, but you got to dig a little deeper to find it. Let me give you some more background on Edward Bernays. I have a video clip here that I want to show you about his life so that you can understand his perspective. Because it may be a situation where Edward Bernays is not on a lot of people's lips, right? And it may be a situation where you're like, well, who is Edward Bernays and why is he important? Why is he valid? Here's why. I'm about to share my screen, and then you can look over this video to give a brief history of Edward Bernays and basically what he was about. Here we go.
As a part of the war effort, the US government set up a Committee on Public Information. Bernays was employed to promote America's war aims in the press. President Woodrow Wilson had announced that the United States would fight not to restore the old empires, but to bring democracy to all of Europe. Bernays proved extremely skillful in promoting this idea, both at home and abroad. And at the end of the war, he was asked to accompany the president to the Paris Peace Conference.
Then, to my surprise, they asked me to go with Woodrow Wilson to the peace conference. And at the age of maybe 26, for the entire time of the peace conference, in the suburb of Paris, and to the world safe for democracy.
Wilson's reception in Paris astounded Bernays and the other American propagandists. Wilson as a liberator of the people, and would create a new world in which the individual would be free. He made him a hero of the masses. As he watched the crowd surge around Wilson, he began to wonder whether it would be possible to do the same type of mass persuasion this time.
decided to use propaganda for war, certainly use it for peace. Propaganda got to be a bad word because of the Germans. So what I did was to try and find some other words. So we found the word council on public relations.
Council on Public Relations, because the word propaganda was quite offensive, as he said. The Germans had been using the word. This was a word that was in the Western media in reference to Germany. But Edward Bernays, once he realized how he can convince Americans to go to war, he realized that he could use his exact same talents with propaganda with marketing. Let me give you an example of what he did. In his book, Propaganda, he talks about how the pork industry, and their goal was to sell pork bellies. So up until the 1940s or whatever, maybe even the 50s, having bacon for breakfast was not even on the consideration of people. Like that wasn't something that was done. Well, after he convinced doctors and other health professionals that having a healthy, hearty breakfast was good, he proposed that bacon being a part of that breakfast, and they put it in commercials and they put it in movies, that pork bellies, and you know, bacon is good, right? Everybody likes bacon. Well, except my Muslim brothers. But anyway, the bacon that wasn't a breakfast item became a breakfast item when he started using propaganda in the media to sell bacon. He also did this with cigarettes. I mean, I can go on and on about that, but I don't want to get too sidetracked. I want to stay on track regarding the whole subject that we're talking about today, which is this potential war with Russia, right? I want to stay on track. Now, I also have another video I want to show you related to the same subject, because the idea here that I'm trying to get across is that war is a racket, but it's also a massive distraction piece. Now, there was a guy, I'll grab this book. There was a guy in the 1930s called, this is the book right here, War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. I'll share it with you. This guy was, here we go. This guy was the most decorated war veteran during his time. And he was so impactful that obviously, you know, they wanted to pick him to run for office and things like that. But he was so impactful that a group of business people, very prominent business people, J.P. Morgan, the DuPonts, and other wealthy families, they came to him with a proposal. And the proposal involved him leading a plot. This is going to sound completely ridiculous, what I'm about to tell you, but it's historical. It happened. Leading a plot to basically overthrow the government of the United States and install a fascist government. Now, I'm telling you all of this because this guy, Smedley Butler, who wrote this book, that War is a Racket, was approached by these people. And this is an example of how popular he was. So let me stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to sharing the book video and show you the document I'm referring to. All right, so this is Wikipedia. Not a big fan of Wikipedia because, again, it's a propaganda tool. But anyway, this is called The Business Plot. The business plot actually took place in the 1930s. Basically what it was a conspiracy to throw out President Franklin Roosevelt and to install this fascist government. Smedley Butler was chosen to lead this group of veterans to overthrow the government and install this fascist regime. And again, he was going to use veterans to do this because they didn't like FDR and some of his policies. And the same people that run the government right now, that are behind the scenes manipulating the situation, the bankers, JP Morgan Chase is still around, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, these families and these operators still exist today. And he told Congress, he being Smedley Butler, that there was a plot to overthrow the government and he didn't want to be a part of it. Let me show you real footage of Smedley Butler, and then you can kind of judge for yourself. But again, if you don't have this historical background, it's very difficult sometimes to have these public policy, international politics conversations, but we're gonna have it tonight because it's worth having. And here we go. So Smedley Butler.
General Smedley Darlington Butler, nicknamed Old Gimledi, was a senior United States Marine Corps officer who fought in both the Mexican Revolution and World War I. During his 34-year career as a Marine, he participated in military actions in the Philippines, China, and Central America, the Caribbean during the Banana Wars, and France in World War I. Butler was, at the time of his death, the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. By the end of his career, Butler had received 16 medals, 5 for heroism. He is one of 19 men to receive the Medal of Honor twice, one of 3 to be awarded both the Marine Corps Brevet Medal and the Medal of Honor, and the only Marine to be awarded the Brevet Medal and 2 Medals of Honor, all for separate actions. In 1933, he became involved in a controversy known as the business plot when he told a congressional committee that a group of wealthy industrialists were planning a military coup to overthrow President Franklin D. Roosevelt, with Butler selected to lead a march of veterans to become dictator, similar to fascist regimes at that time. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you would like to.
All right, so that's Smedley Butler. I wanted to give you that history and also to remind you that this guy was no chump, and he was chosen to overthrow the government. Wasn't successful, but he attempted to do it. Now let me give you some words from this book here. Right, we're gonna read a passage together, just to give you an idea of what he was about. He did a speech in 1931 describing his military service. Now this is on the 4th page in the introduction. You can read along with me, but here's what he says. Pull this down a little bit, the lighting right. All right. He says, I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service. And during that period, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. Kind of like what's happening today, right? In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1902 through 1912. I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for the American oil interests in 1914. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916, and I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of 6 Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. In China in 1927, I helped see that the Standard Oil Company, that was the Rockefellers, went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. Smedley Butler, War is a Racket. Get this book. It's a small book. It's an easy read. I could go into more detail, but it has everything to do with the topic that we're talking about tonight. The racket, once again, that they're about to put the American people through a war potentially with Russia. The flip side to all of this is that we actually may not go to war with Russia. This could all be posturing. That's my opinion. I don't think it's going to be a war. I think there's too much to lose on both sides, but this is a very good distraction because I personally think after 3 years almost of this pandemic that people are kind of disgusted with the leadership in this country. And this makes a hell of a distraction, right? Just like in this book we discussed earlier, The Grand Chessboard, to get people distracted so that they can galvanize and unify under the flag again, like we did in Iraq, like we did with 9/11. This is what I believe this is totally about. All right, I got some more footage I want to show you. This next clip is, let's see, we did Zbigniew Brzezinski. Yeah, let's listen to Mr. Stephen Cohen, professor at New York University. Now,
NATO expansion.
once again, let me just pull this back up because I want y'all to really understand where I'm coming from as it relates to NATO. NATO expansion is the reason why Russia is doing what it's doing right now. It basically feels threatened. Just to recap, if Russia decided to put troops and military arms on the border of Canada or Mexico or in the Virgin Islands or in the Caribbean, trust me, United States, this government would open up a can of whoop ass so fast that it wouldn't even be like a consideration. Why? Because it would be a threat, right? We got Russian troops on our border. Flip it. This is exactly what's happening in Eastern Europe. The United States with NATO, the NATO alliance, is on the border of Russia. And since the 90s, they have been creeping up more and more and closer and closer. It's almost like your neighbor telling you that you're being the aggressor because he's on your front porch banging on your door. Think about that. That's literally what it's like. It's ridiculous, but we've fallen for it because, again, when you got the mainstream, the corporate media giving you your information, you can be sold almost anything. All right, so this is Professor Cohen, New York University, breaking down what we've been talking about for the last 10, 15 minutes. Here we go.
Not over for the Russians, it's a reality. NATO's sitting on its borders. It's not about future NATO expansion, it's about current. NATO expansion represents the following to Russia. Hear this, I believe. It represents a profoundly broken promise to Russia made by the first Bush that in return for united Germany in NATO, NATO would not expand eastward. This is beyond any dispute. People say, well, they never signed a treaty. But a deal is a deal. The United States gives its word unless we're shysters. And if you don't get it in writing, we'll cheat. We broke our word. And when both Putin and Medvedev say publicly to Madeleine Albright and others, we, Russia, feel deceived and betrayed, that's what they're talking about. So NATO represents on the part of Russia a lack of trust. You break your words to us. To what extent can we trust you? Secondly, it represents military encirclement. If you sit in the Kremlin and you look out at where NATO is and where they want to go, it's everywhere. It's everywhere on Russia's borders. But there's something even more profound. That's a taboo in the United States. NATO expansion represents for the Russians American hypocrisy and a dual standard. And they see it this way, and I can't think of any way to deny their argument. The expansion of NATO is the expansion of the American sphere of influence. Plain and simple. Where NATO goes, our military force goes. Where NATO goes, our arms and munitions go because they have to buy American weapons. Where NATO goes, Western soldiers go, who date their women, they bring along their habits and all the other things. It's clearly undebatable, indisputable, an expansion of America's sphere of influence. So there has been a tremendous expansion of America's sphere of influence since the mid-1990s, right plunk on Russian borders. All the while, every administration, American administration, saying to Russia, including the Obama administration, you cannot have a sphere of influence because that's old thinking. Well, I mean, the Russians may be cruel, but they're not stupid. In other words, what they say is we can now have the biggest sphere of influence the world's ever seen, and you don't get any, not even on your own border. In fact, we're taking what used to be your traditional sphere of influence, along with the energy and all the rest. It's ours. Again, this idea of a winner-take-all policy. This is the enormous resentment in Russia. The relationship will never become a stable cooperative relationship until we deal with this problem. Does it mean Russia's entitled to a sphere of influence? I don't want to speak for Jack Matlock, but Jack thinks yes, depending on what you mean by sphere of influence. They can't occupy countries. We had a Monroe Doctrine. But the point is that until this is worked out, the relationship will never truly be post-war. The problem is it's taboo to talk about this issue of who has a sphere of influence, who's entitled to it. I think there are solutions, but you can't even get the question asked.
All right, it's taboo to talk about it, which is exactly why we're talking about it, because you're not going to get this information unless you dig for it. And, I want to thank the people that have been watching tonight. I appreciate your support. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share. And we're going to do more talks like this in the future. All right, here's another book that I picked up off my shelf related to the same thing, but, again, a classic book, George Orwell's 1984, talks about propaganda, talks about the new world, the way things are being set up. Very dystopian novel. It was a movie being made. In fact, I got a clip I want to show you about this, but I wanted to find in this book, and I didn't mark it off, where the writer, George Orwell, said there was a period in this future country. Now, this book was written in the 40s. 1948 is when I think it was published. But it was about what would happen in the future in 1984. He discusses how the people at that time never knew who they were at war with. They had technology. They had televisions in this novel. They had resources, radios. They could listen to that stuff. But it was always a war going on. A war with either Oceania or East Asia. And it's so prescient because that's exactly what's happened now. We're always in a war. We're at a war in the Middle East. We're at a war. Now we're going to war with Russia. We got a Cold War with China or a trade war with China. There's always war. But the mentality of people has been so dumbed down that this quote here, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Ignorance is strength. Now, this was in the novel repeated over and over again. Obviously, it's designed to kind of be a play on words. But man, let me level with you. That's exactly the mentality that we have right now. The idea that we have to go to war to keep peace. That's a mantra that you hear in the corporate media all the time. We got to keep the peace. So what does that mean? I mean, we got to send some troops halfway around the world and open up a can of democracy on some brown country in order to keep the peace, right? Freedom is slavery. All the mandates and the stuff that they want us to do, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, social distance, do all this. And never mind the fact that we are the most surveilled country on the planet right now, literally. Everybody has got a Ring doorbell, and if you don't, you got a mobile phone that's listening to you. You got a computer that's watching you. listen, I can digress on that. And ignorance is strength. The American public is so dumbed down and happy about it that it is really a sad state. So this quote, war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. I think it's right on time. I think this guy, man, he was a fortune teller or something, or what they call it, he was a prophet for what we're dealing with right now. All right, so look, here's a clip from the movie. Let me see if I can find this here. Do I have that clip? False Flag, Smedley Butler, Bernays, Brzezinski. Let me see if I can find this for you. Maybe I don't. Anyway, George Orwell's book, 1984, really is on point when it comes to the situation of war and a society that really is making everybody just kind of walk in lockstep with stuff you don't necessarily agree with. But if you speak your mind, if you say you don't agree with it, then, you get ostracized, right? You get beat up because you can think about history or events that have happened. Look, these are some books, like I said, I want you to go out and get. If you are not a student of history, if this stuff bores you, then come back to my channel, because I'm going to try to make it real easy to understand and real plain. But the books are 1984, George Orwell. Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard. War is a Racket, Smedley Butler, classic. And Propaganda, Edward Bernays. These 4 books right here, I think, is essential in anybody's library if you want to understand international politics, politics in general, but mainly international politics and domestic politics. So with that said, I want to thank you for watching another episode of the Scott Report. Please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate you watching tonight. And